So I think it, just besides the fact that the bloody recording might fail or whatnot, or, we do things that we don't do. So I think there's a different experience when you come here and when you kind of don't come to the lecture. So I can encourage you to come to the lecture. But at the end of the day, I don't want to patronize you. Yeah, you live your life the way you live your life. But I don't know if you want to do things differently in a way. But you guys are here, so I'm going to start with the lecture nevertheless. So what I want to do today, I want to talk a little more about false enforcement again, simply because I think it's worth talking a little more about it, and last time it felt like we were rushing that towards the end. So I want to talk about a second experiment, a second study that those guys did in that context. Now we were talking about the wine tasting example. You remember students were kind of asked to taste wine, and then at the end the idea was, or the question was, can we kind of make people follow other people, conformity, but can we even on the top of that make people enforce something that they don't believe in themselves? And that's sort of this idea of false enforcement. Yeah. So the question was, can social pressure lead to false enforcement of norms? There's a norm, you don't believe in it, but you kind of make other people behave according to the norm. That's false enforcement. Something you don't believe in it yourself, but you punish others for not doing it. Which is like a very crazy thing, but actually we observe that in the real world, and we find that. And why did we talk about that? Because actually, as it turns out, false enforcement makes norms stable that don't make sense. Now, there are norms out there that don't make any sense. We don't have no idea why they are there. They shouldn't be there. They're just completely stupid, but somehow they are still there. Somehow they are sort of leftovers. And we'll come back to that, so I have a little exercise for you along those lines. But the question was, can social pressure lead to false enforcement of norms? Like other people doing something, can that lead, not you doing that as well, but you actually also forcing other people to do it, even though you don't believe in it yourself. So that is sort of like just as a little reminder, like a disbelief. You don't believe in something yourself, but there's social pressure. Others seem to believe in it, and then you start saying that you believe in it even when you don't. And false enforcement would be like this last thing in this, which doesn't happen all the time, but the question is, does it happen, and can we actually, that's sort of the question, does it happen? Yeah, that's sort of where these experiments come into play. False enforcement would then be if you start punishing others who say they do not believe in it in order to fake your own sincerity in it. Yeah. Okay, so we had these two, I think it's a great paper, Villa and others in AGS, on the false enforcement of norms. So they did these two experiments. One was about wine tasting. I talked about that in detail. Like students were allowed to drink wine, and then afterwards they had to rate other students in a way. And then afterwards they also rated each other on that. And as it turned out, when they kind of made these public ratings of others, they started to rate those highly. That kind of seemed to go with what everybody else was saying, while those that deviated, even though it was clearly, in this case, how do you control this belief? Actually they did that by actually making one of the three wines incredibly bad, right? So there was no difference in it. So they could say that it was objectively not good wine, and then people kind of still sort of, when they kind of made these public readings, rated others highly who followed the conformity, like saying that one wine was greater than the others, while in fact it wasn't. Yeah? But maybe this becomes clearer again when I talk about the second example. I want to talk about the second example and about evaluating an unintelligible text. And the reason why I want to talk about it is because you guys read this text. It's the very first reading that I gave you about the hermeneutics of transgressing quantum, boundaries in something. Was the so-called affair, where, I remember it was in the 1990s, 1996, where this physicist just wanted to show how messed up sociology has become, and he wrote this bogus journal article that had a lot of fancy postmodern sentences in it, but didn't make any sense, submitted it to a journal and it got accepted. And afterwards he said, guys, something is really, really off here. Yeah. So that was the so-called affair. What they did in this study, and I'm going to walk you through this study now to maybe hammer home that point about false enforcement, how they actually tested it, because it's kind of, I think it's very creative, and how do you test these kind of things? How do you test if there is something like false enforcement? Yeah? How do you go and find these things out? Yeah? And they go down a route of experiments. So I think it's very powerful stuff. Using experiments are very straightforward and clear. At the end of the day, they had students like you coming in. Yeah, they had them, I don't know, in total was 76 students that participated in this study. And they were sort of told that now there's like a group evaluation or a round table where they're going to sit around that. Effectively, everybody was sitting in a little cubicle, but they were told that they are interacting with other students that are currently in the room, while in fact they were not interacting with other people that were in the room. They were interacting with fake other participants. Right? And then the idea was, that those students that were sitting in this cubicle, and often this sort of how it goes, I don't know, there's sort of like little walls they put up, and then you have to sit in your little thing, and you have to answer certain things. And you're being told that other people in the room do the same thing. And then you're being told that you see what the others are saying, or what the others said on this. So here they were told that they would interact with 5 other participants in their group during the experience, but in fact they interacted with 5 simulated participants, so they didn't really exist. Yeah? So now the story is, do you rate a text differently when I tell you that the other 5 people in the room really like that text? That's basically the story. Or do you say it's nonsense when other people in the room say it's nonsense? And then you might see how our social context comes into play, because we are surrounded by other people all the time. And once you kind of start noticing that, you see it all the time, and how your behavior is affected by other people around you. Yeah? And here it is about this norm of not admitting to yourself or to others that something, that you haven't understood something. Yeah? And often in the academic world, it happens all the time that people write nonsense, but nobody says it's nonsense because they don't want to appear to be stupid for not understanding it. So never be afraid of saying that you didn't understand anything, seriously, because then how are you ever going to get better in it? So basically what they did, they told participants that this text was written by Dr. Robert Nelson, PhD, Newcomb professor, blah, 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 at Harvard University. So basically, you were sitting there and I give you this text and it says this professor wrote it. You think, wow, this is kind of like a big shot. He's kind of Albert W. Newcomb professor of philosophy, something. He's a MacArthur Genius Grant recipient, so this guy must be really clever. And more than that, he's at Harvard University. This guy really must know what he's talking about. Yeah? So this guy kicks ass. And in fact, this is complete bogus. So this guy doesn't exist. There is no Dr. Robert Nelson. But that's sort of what they told the students, that this guy wrote this text, which was actually complete bogus. Yeah? So they used this text that Alan Sokal had written about transgressing the boundaries towards the transformative hermeneutics of quantum gravity. Yeah, you read the text. It is bogus. There's nothing in it. Fancy words, but the whole thing doesn't make sense. Students read that text and thought it was written by Dr. Robert Nelson from Harvard University. Okay. So after the students read their text, and it's me asking you to come in, and I don't know if you would have those little cubicles, I probably would play some experiments with you like that. And then, I would ask you to rate the text according to how understandable it was, how persuasive it was, what the logical coherence of it was, what the quality of the argument was, or the overall quality of those kind of things. You rate that text. Now that's sort of what those 76 students did. However, the text was complete nonsense, And the way it worked is that the students gave their ratings after seeing, so basically they were told that 4 other students made a rating, and all of these other 4 students, they gave this text a very high rating, and then the actual participant rated the text. It's like I would ask you to tell me about how good is the quality of that text after I told you how 4 other people in the room, supposedly in the room, rated that text, and all of them rated it very highly. So by having these fake participants, I can control what you think, what other people said about the text. So, and these fake ratings, they praise the text highly. It's basically like you read a text, I asked you to rate it, but before I tell you, 4 other people thought this text is brilliant. What do you think what this text is? Yeah. And then you give your rating. And then afterwards, so this was like a sequence. It looked like a sequence, like people do this in sequence, but the first 4 were fake, and then there was an actual participant, and then there was another fake participant after that, after you gave your rating, and that was now again a fake participant, but it was like a lone rider, the person, this 6th participant rated the text very low, said this is bogus. After 4 other fake participants said it's great, and you said whatever you said, I don't know what you said, but then the 6th participant said it's bogus. Okay, so that was like the first step of this thing, yeah. And then there was the second step where they afterwards, first they also check is there conformity, and actually there is conformity. Yeah, it's very straightforward. When 4 other people say the text is great, you are more likely to say the text is great as well, yeah. Even though it is complete bogus. There's social pressure happening here, and that's sort of what this study picks up. But that's not all that the study does. So that's it becomes a really good study because they move one step further. And in the next step, they say, okay, after all those ratings are revealed, they ask the students to rate how good the other students' ratings were. Yeah. Basically, they judge not just the text, but also the other people who had done the rating before. Yeah. And then they did. Now this is sort of now where the treatment condition comes into play. They did this in 2 settings. One was like a public setting, like basically they're all, I don't know, there's 6 students in the room, and students are being, I don't know, they see the fake ratings, and then they rate themselves, and then afterwards they're being asked to say, how useful do you think were the other ratings? Yeah. Were they good? Public means everybody else could see it. Private means nobody could see it. This judgment of others, right, in the second step. So here you see the experimental design. Yeah, that's really how it goes. Students come in, they read the text, and then some of them, evaluate the text in private. So they just say what they think about it. Others kind of evaluate the text in public. So basically, others see what you're reading, and then the second step, there's this private and public reading of other participants, judging how good those other participants were. And the idea is the following. If there's something like false enforcement, people should not only just follow the ratings that other people give, that's conformity to begin with, yeah. But if there's something like false enforcement, even if I think the text is bogus to begin with, yeah, if I see lots of other people saying the text is brilliant, am I now rating other people who say the text is bogus lower? Yeah. That's where false enforcement comes into play now. Like, I don't believe in the text myself, but I punish others for saying that the text is bogus. Why? Because they don't follow the group, right? That's sort of like this idea, or the hypothesis that they have here, that when you see lots of other people doing something, you don't just follow up and do on it, but you also kind of start to enforce what they are doing, even when you might not believe in it yourself. And that's sort of like the results that you have here. So let me quickly walk you through that result. Well, first of all, you see like a whole bunch of distinctions here between private and public, and then conformed and did not conform, and then we have conformist and non-conformist target. Yeah? Essentially, think about it in the following way, that this is sort of like the number of ratings that students gave to each other. Yeah? How good was their judgment of the situation? Now, the conformist targets are basically those fake participants who said the text is brilliant. Yeah? These are like the majority, like the conformity. thingy. While the deviant target is basically this lone rider, this sixth guy who said the text is bogus. So that's like the one difference here. And then the story is like, okay, how highly rated do people rate somebody who conformed, and how do I rate somebody who deviated from this norm that this text is supposedly brilliant? Yeah, after all, Professor Doctor something. Yeah. So that's the distinction between the gray and the white bars, and now this is split up into different groupings. Yeah? Let's just now focus on, let's say, the first two here. Yeah? There we have conformed and did not conform. That's basically now the question, did I conform or did I not conform? So basically the first group conformed here in private means I got these 4 other fake ratings, the text is brilliant, it's complete bogus, but I said it's brilliant too. I conformed. That's sort of what this means. I conformed, I kind of followed what other people did. Even though it is bogus. And now the question is, okay, now I'm in this setting, I said that the text is great, even though it's not. How did I rate other people? And then you see that sort of like, I don't know, I rate the other people who also said the text is great about a little higher than the guy who didn't like the text, who said it's complete bogus. Now this is now a second group. This is now those individuals who didn't follow up on those 4 fake ratings before. You know, like I give you 4 fake ratings. They all say the text is great. You say, oh, that's complete bogus. That's complete bullshit in a way. So you do not conform. Now you're in this group. Yeah? And then how do you rate other people? Now you see those people who did not conform, they actually rated the other person who also didn't conform, the deviant target, higher. They seem to appreciate that others also didn't follow up on that. Now the story of the paper is the following: is that when you confirm the conform group here and conform group here, this is now private setting. That means like the rating where we rated each other afterwards, it's not being revealed and nobody sees that. The public setting is after all those ratings happen and then people start judging each other, they do that in public. Now the idea is, do they rate other people who didn't follow the conformity rule? Do they rate them down? Or is there sort of like a bigger difference? And that's sort of what the message of this paper is, that now this difference between the conformist target and the deviant target here becomes larger. That's the story of it, which is kind of funny because the only difference here now is that those judgments of other people are being revealed to others. They're basically in public, yeah, afterwards. So when you stand around with each other and let's say you rate each other, you say how good are the other people in assessing the situation, you follow more you follow more what you believe in, while when you do that in public and everybody else sees, you seem to praise other people who followed the norm, even though it is bogus, more. So, a long story, short outcome at the end of the day, students evaluate the text higher when they evaluate it publicly after 4 fake appraisals compared to when they evaluate it without the fake appraisals. And they rated the 6 participants who said the paper was nonsense down when they rated each other in public. And it's basically, that's evidence, or that's sort of an experimental design, how we get to this very complicated thing of how can we actually detect false enforcement. It's through this difference. That suddenly we do something in public and suddenly it's that they rate one group more than the others. Yeah? And basically group members having already conformed to a norm will also enforce it to signal to other group members their sincerity of their conformity. Which is very, very odd, but it does happen in real life. Yeah? Mm. And the experiment showed this. This is sort of why we have this experiment here. Because you can talk about these things, yeah, but you actually need to show it. Yeah? So that's sort of when I believe in it. You can have great ideas about what happens, about norms, who follows what, and so on, but show me that it actually is like that. So you need to come up with a design or with a study, or within a year they use an experiment to actually show that is the case. Okay, so we shouldn't necessarily assume that enforcers believe the views they are pressured to adopt. But anyway, so much about force enforcement. I have a little exercise for you guys now in that context. Basically, I want you to identify, we talked about these norms that don't make sense. So now I want you to think about a norm or one norm that does not seem to make sense or does not seem to make sense anymore, and briefly think about what kind of role social influence plays in that. So I give you 2 minutes to do that. And there it probably would be, I think that's the most, because nowadays, kind of discussion we have when I first realized so nowadays they know, I don't know, it doesn't make sense to relate that back to, like, well, maybe some people vote for like, what would be towards the enforcement? Okay, guys, we had a few interesting examples about norms, which is sort of this funny thing. Sometimes things don't make sense, and that's where it becomes interesting as a social scientist. Yeah. So I was talking about puzzles and these kind of things. These are puzzles. When you have something that doesn't make sense, then to try to think about why is it there, right? And then for us, it's relevant. What is sort of like like social influence playing a role in keeping things alive, and ultimately you might have norms that nobody wants. None of the persons here wants, but still we all do it, and we even might enforce it at the end of the day, which is really, really crazy. But it's fascinating. Okay, so now let me move on and start another topic. So I'm going to start this now, but I'm going to continue with that topic in the next lecture. So I realized I should split it up. I want to talk about tipping points and threshold models. I have different things. Today I'm just going to start talking about the first two on that, about the big and the small, and about tipping points. So the big and the small. What do we mean by that? That's basically about the reading that you guys had to do for today. Malcolm Gladwell, he was like this journalist who writes, it's like a storyline, basically. It's like you can read it like a fiction book almost. And he describes these things that suddenly, this company, they made shoes, Hush Puppies. They, almost went bankrupt. But then for whatever reason, they became hip. I was back, I can't remember when that was, the 90s maybe. And then at some point, those shoes were super hip and everybody wanted to have Hush Puppies, and it was super cool to have Hush Puppies. Yeah. And this company, they didn't really know what happened, because from overnight, they went from almost being bankrupt to suddenly being super, super popular. They couldn't even meet the demand, which is very, very odd. Yeah. How did that happen? Did there something happen? Was it suddenly this shoe better than it was before? That's sort of the kind of things that suddenly, sometimes, something really changed. Or back in the days, the use of a fax machine. Nobody had a fax machine, and then at some point, almost within a year or two, everybody in companies had a fax machine. Maybe you already see how this is happening, because if nobody has it, it doesn't make sense for you to have it either. But if lots of other people have it, bang, it makes sense for you to have it. It's a bit like, are you on Snapchat now? Or are you on WhatsApp? Yeah? If your friends are on WhatsApp, well, it makes a lot of sense for you to be there too, because then you communicate with them. But or are you on Skype or Google Hangouts? I'm not on Google Hangouts because none of my friends is on Google Hangouts. At the end, I don't really care about whether I'm on Google Hangouts or whether I'm on Skype. At the end, will you see how I have more incentive to jump on something like this bandwagon when other people already do it? Yeah. And And again, this is sort of like, okay, where the one thing influences the other, which influences the other, and so on and so forth. That's sort of where this idea of tipping comes into play. That's also, you can also talk about crime in a way, because there was this big thing, I don't know, in the 1990s, crime in the US, especially in New York, massively dropped down. This is like crime rate per 1,000. It cut down to a third. It's a big puzzle. Nobody really knows why. Yeah, it's great that it happened. There's not that much crime anymore in New York. But why did it drop down within a few years so dramatically? Criminologists banged their head against the wall, came up with all sorts of different ideas. But one very interesting idea, and we'll talk about that after the break, I'll talk about how crime can be contagious. And if that is the case, then how stopping crime can be contagious too. Yeah. And then we move into a direction. So basically, what this now does, which is something that some sociologists have problems with, when you see big changes occurring, we naturally tend to think that these changes are caused by something equally big. Yeah? Like a big outcome, big effect, must be driven by a big cause. Now we tend to think that these things are proportional to each other. But often there are no big causes. Often there are no big causes. Often there's just maybe just a tiny little difference, and that kind of has then a big implication. And that sort of makes us thinking sometimes, I don't know why I had this graph here, but sometimes some things just become popular for whatever reason. Yeah? And overnight, I don't know, there you are. If you're lucky enough like me, you just have a beard long enough that at some point it might come into fashion again. Yeah? But I have some other examples here. Let me just play this because it's so funny anyway. You remember the Harlem Shake, do you? Yeah? So, the sound doesn't work again. Seriously. Okay, I'll show you the Harlem Shake next time because it's so much fun, with the music. Yeah, you can just see the vision of it. But you remember the thing, and at some point it was all over. Like everybody was doing a bloody Harlem Shake. Yeah? There's like another group, like there's this music, and then at some point the music switches, and then everybody is just going nuts. Yeah, and suddenly these things were all over. Yeah? And you have these things on the internet all the time. I don't know, what is the latest thing? Yeah? I don't know, planking used to be the thing, people lying down, or then the funny thing where people did pictures with their head and their body somewhere else. You remember that thing? And so basically, the question is, how do these things sometimes happen? Yeah? And these things happen in real life all the time. All the time, something suddenly just really takes off. Yeah? Oh, this is an interesting one. Yeah? And it seems like overnight something happens. Yeah? And we call that, so first in reality things often change very dramatically and quickly, almost overnight. And we call sudden changes from one regime to another a phase transition. The classic phase transition that is when something freezes. Water is liquid until a certain point, and at some point it freezes, bam. It goes below zero, it freezes very quickly. Yeah. That's a phase transition. So basically the point here is big outcomes do not necessarily have big reasons. Yeah. Sometimes you can have a very small cause leading to a very big effect. And hopefully you'll get that this happens even more so when we talk in the social sciences about things that influence each other. Yeah? Because maybe you see already where I'm going with this. With the Harlem Shake, one person is doing that, another person is doing that, and you see suddenly everybody is doing it. Ice bucket challenge, everybody is doing the fucking ice bucket challenge, yeah? Because everybody does it. Yeah? And then you start doing it too, and by doing it yourself, you contribute to other people seeing that this is sort of what you do. Yeah? And then bang, it kind of takes off. And sometimes you wonder, why are some people popular and others are not? And I tell you, sometimes there's no real reason. Sometimes it's just a random fluctuation to begin with. For whatever reason, one person just got a few YouTube hits at the beginning, and then it kind of took off, while the other person didn't get that, but could have equally gotten the clicks as well. Okay. So that's basically what we call tipping points. So tipping points are those moments where something just seems to change from the one regime to the other, and it seems to take off. Yeah. And Malcolm Gladwell, he wrote this whole book about the tipping point, which is a nice and easy read, I think. It's quite entertaining. And he has a definition of a tipping point, saying the tipping point is a dramatic moment when little causes drive the unexpected to become expected and propel the idea of radical change to certain acceptance. Basically, the idea is that small little things, you change small little things, it has no effect, there's no effect, there's no effect, there's no effect, there's no effect, and then you change a little more, and then boom, it has a huge effect. That's a tipping point. When you kind of reach that, when bang, when kind of something then takes off. And we find these tipping points in real life, actually quite a lot. Yeah. The classic example here is when we look at housing, with segregation. And you'll hear more about that we make people, a little less tolerant, a little less tolerant, a little less tolerant. The society still looks like the same. And then we make them a slightly little less tolerant, and then bam, we end up in a completely segregated world where, blacks live in one part of the town and whites live in another part of town. And that's sometimes confusing because we see that and we think, okay, there must be a big reason for it. But the tipping points, the idea is that sometimes these things just have very small little points that lead to it. So we see it in neighborhood segregation. Another study where they found that they looked at effects of role models in a community. Yeah? Role models. So think about how many role models are there in your neighborhood where you're living, basically. Yeah, that's sort of like the story what they did. And they looked at dropout rates of high status workers where there were almost no change. Okay. Okay, so the idea is in a neighborhood you have other people that have good jobs. Yeah? And then they see how does that affect people dropping out of high school. So basically you have role models in your neighborhood. The idea is when you have more role models in your neighborhood, you are more encouraged to do something, you stay hard, you come to the lectures, you work hard to get to things, you don't drop out. So what they observed is that it didn't really matter whether there are 40% role models in your neighborhood or 5% role models in your neighborhood. It didn't really matter. It was the same effect on people dropping out of high school. But when it kind of went down a little further, from 5.6 to 3.5, the number of people with high status, then the dropout rate more than doubled. Bam, it went up. So there seems to be something happening here. It's like a non-linear relationship between the number of high status workers and the people who drop out of high school. The same thing they also found with teenage pregnancies. So again, same story. Are there like role model in your neighborhood? How many people have teenage pregnancies? Sort of like the same number. It didn't really matter whether there were 40% people with great jobs or 5% with great jobs in the neighborhood. But once it kind of dropped a little further down than that, again from 5.6 to 3.4, teenage pregnancies almost doubled. Again, like bang, it goes up. Yeah. Okay. So the idea behind this is that ideas, products, or messages, they can actually behave like the spread of a virus. And there you can kind of see like you can have something that kind of is contained, the flu is contained, but if it's a little more infectious, bang, everybody gets it and we have a pandemic. Yeah. And it can be simple things like what is the infection rate? It can be a tiny little going up, or or the incubation period of something, yeah, of a sickness. There's not huge difference in it, but the one suffices to multiply, while the other one does not suffice to multiply. Yeah. So I have a graph here that shows that. So let's say if you have a disease and you infect 1.2 people on average, yeah, with it, that means every time more people will be infected than they were before, right? But if on average you only infect 0.9 people, that means one out of 9. Yeah. That means every time there's a chance that fewer people will get the sickness than they had before. So even though there's just a tiny little difference in how many people you infect, you could even go closer from 0.99 to 0.101. In the one case, it at some point will really take off, while in the other case, it will completely die out. Yeah? And then you see how a small little difference can actually either lead to amplification into the one direction or to amplification into the other direction. And that's sort of the example of a tipping point, where social contagion, small causes can have then very large effects, and which is sort of a little strange that cause and effect are not proportional to each other anymore. Yeah? And we often think that large effects are caused by something large, but as soon as social influence plays a role, this does not have to be the case anymore. Okay, so whenever you see something big, like a big riot, it is not necessarily because lots of people joined it. And when you see a riot not being successful, it's not necessarily because people were not into it in the first instance. So sometimes small little changes, which is interesting because that provides us a way of kind of actually making a difference. So even the small little change that you can make can have a huge difference, can have a big implication. And next time we'll talk more about that in terms of threshold models. I'm going to play a little rioting game with you guys. And if you haven't done the reading for today, just go. This is the same reading that you had for today. It's a good reading for next lecture as well. Michael Gladwell, 3 point. Yeah? Okay, thanks very much. That's for today.